Tiffany from Wex Photo Video, and we're here in Vienna today to talk to you about how to get the best portraits. So I'm going to talk to you about camera settings, we're going to talk about how to find an interesting subject, and we're also going to cover light. At the moment we've got some really good light, but it is quite flat, so we'll see how we get on. Today I'm shooting on the A7 IV, so hopefully this will do me some favours, but we'll talk more about kit shortly. So let's talk about kit before we get started. I'm a big believer that kit shouldn't hold you back, and we have a great use section where you can pick up a lot of different cameras. But today I'm on the A7 IV. One thing I really like about the latest models of Sony is that they're a lot lighter in weight, and their menu system is so easy to use now. I've got the 24-70 on f4. That's a pretty flexible lens for street photography. I would usually also carry a 70-200 just for that extra push, maybe getting some shots where I'm not as confident or I feel like I need that extra length. I wouldn't shoot on primes normally because I find that they're not very flexible, and when you're in a situation where you're photographing people, it's always going to be difficult to get the shot as quickly as you really need it. But yeah, so we're going to head out to a market and then we're going to go out in the streets of Vienna and see what we can get. So first and foremost, let's talk about settings, because if you don't get your settings right, you're going to come home with nothing. So it's a really bright day, that's problem number one. There's not a lot of contrasting light, that's problem number two. And we're shooting street photography in an incredibly busy and fast-paced market. So that's going to be challenge number three. So I like to shoot in aperture priority. One of the reasons for that is because people often move out of their way, a lot of people hide from the camera, and they're not here for you to take their picture. And so really, you want to make sure that speed is on your side. Now, aperture-wise, I'm on f4. I think that should be okay for today, if I'm being really honest. It'd be nice if I had a bit more flexibility, but that's not the lens that I've brought with me. So we're going to get started and see how we go. And what I'll probably do is adjust my settings as we're moving, because there will be shots where there's more light from the market and less light. There'll also be shots where maybe people are under things, which will change the way that I'm shooting as well. So I'll talk to you about that more as we go. Let's talk about being brave, because that is one of the most important things about taking people's portrait in public. So you may as well be brazen. You think that you're discreet, you're not discreet. You're holding a camera in your hand, and normally cameras are quite big. So what I would suggest is that you either ask people if you're a bit uncomfortable with it. A lot of people will say no, but you will get some yeses. Or if you're feeling really brave, you just start shooting. The worst thing that can happen is someone asks you to delete it, and in that case, you just lost a shot. It's not a big deal. I also think that one of the really important things about shooting people is knowing when not to shoot too. I wouldn't shoot somebody if they were really upset or in distress, and so I think, you know, set your own boundaries for that, but that's sort of my rules that I follow. We mentioned earlier about finding interesting subject matters, and I think with portraits that's really, really important, because not everyone you take a picture of is going to be an interesting picture. I try and look for people that look a bit different, maybe people who are wearing something that stands out. A yellow coat, for example, is always really great. One of the most important things is just remembering that it's a bit of a numbers game. You might take a picture and at the time you don't think it's a good picture, and when you get home, actually the composition was really nice or their facial feature was good. If you're struggling to find someone who looks interesting, you can always take photos of someone who's doing something interesting. So mid-chew, smoke in front of them, cooking, always makes a great picture. One thing that's really important when you're shooting portraits is remembering the location and the background of those images. So yes, you want the person in the image to be interesting, that is your focal point, but your background can really make or break your photograph. We were just shooting in a market, and so most of the pictures will have a really similar feel and background. So because of this, we've come to a new location so that we can get something that looks a little bit different and has a little bit of a different feeling to it. Now, when you're composing a portrait, obviously you have the classic center frame. You can also shoot portrait, but I quite like to be a bit different sometimes and shoot landscape. And I also like to look for places where the person is maybe to the left or to the right. I just think it gives the image a bit more balance, and the negative space is a really great thing to add to your images. So we're going to head out now and see what we can find in the city. One of my favorite tips is looking for easy wins. And I think this is something that photographers try and avoid, and they don't really like to talk about it because it's not, niche or specialist. But you can find easy win shots, shots that are going to look beautiful without you having to put in too much effort. Yellow coats always are a big winner. Whenever you find someone in like a bright neon yellow coat, it's always going to look really beautiful in any environment. It's going to massively stand out and it'll make your images pop a little more. Another easy win is finding somebody that's sort of older, stood on their own against a wall, maybe from a distance with a 200mm. It's an easy win shot because they look beautiful, they've got really interesting faces, and you can center frame it and you've got a shot straight away. I think one thing that people don't really talk about as well is there are techniques you can use to frame your subject a bit more to make the picture more interesting. Smoke is a really great way of doing that, as are things like flowers. So you can have the flower in the foreground, the person slightly behind them with the blur at the front. Just gives you a bit more depth of field, and it takes your portraits from sort of base level to sort of the next level as a photographer, or at least in my opinion it does. Sometimes you get really lucky, and street photography and street portraits, there's sort of a few things that can happen where you're just like, oh, what a great shot. So two older gentlemen, really interesting looking faces, wearing basically matching suits and hats, just walked through the park. There's no one around them, no one behind them. It was really clean. And they sort of were linking arms and walking really slowly. And they both saw my camera and looked differently at the same time. It's just one of those perfect shots. You just have to be really patient to get those though. Hopefully that has given you some tips on how to get started in portraiture, and especially portraiture out and about. I think when you're doing street photography, it can be quite overwhelming for the first time, especially if you've never used a camera before, and you might be sort of trying to figure out what to shoot. And that's why I always think shooting people is a really interesting subject, because it's an easy theme. There's lots of really interesting people to look for. A few takeaway tips from today that I would say are my sort of highlights or key features of doing portraiture is to know your camera. You really do need to be quick and speedy when you're out in the street, because people do move, things get in the way, the shot doesn't last particularly long. My second tip is to think about the subject matter. So is that person interesting? Do they stand out from the crowd? Is there something about them that makes you want to photograph them, or are you just photographing the environment around them? Because no matter how beautiful the environment around them is, the picture will still not be as interesting if the person in it isn't. And finally, I think you should always take more pictures than you need. It's so easy when you're first starting out in photography to think that, every shot needs to be perfect. It doesn't. I've taken some awful shots today, and I've taken some ones I'm really happy with. I think it's all about practice and just learning how to do what you enjoy doing. The last thing I want to talk about is just permissions, because it's really important to understand what you can and can't do. Now, it's completely legal to do street photography in most places. It's not a problem at all. You can take pictures of people, but if somebody asks you to delete it, you need to. That's one big rule that does exist in street photography. The other thing about permission is that you can ask for it. People will sometimes say yes. You can even ask for it after you've taken the photo if that makes you more comfortable. So if you take any pictures and you want to share them with Wex, tag us at Wex-How-To and we'll take a look on our Instagram channel. Otherwise, I've been Tiffany and I will see you in the next video.